Jonathan Vance knew how to throw a party. Floating above the neonlit cityscape of Orion Prime, his space yacht, the Golden Goose, gleamed like a miniature sun. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of vintage champagne, laughter, and the artificial gravity system struggling to keep up with the excessive number of guests bouncing between dance floors and card tables. A live string quartet, robots of course, programmed to play only the most exquisite classical pieces, floated in the center of the ballroom. Vance, draped in a tailored platinum suit, basked in the attention, regaling a small circle with yet another story about how he'd crushed a competitor last quarter. "And that's why I own the patent for self-cleaning socks," he declared, raising his glass. "Utterly essential for deep space travel." His audience laughed, some genuinely, others out of financial obligation. His personal bodyguard, Jack Steele, stood nearby, arms crossed, scanning the room. Jack wasn't a fan of these parties. Too many people. Too much noise. Too many potential security risks. He had seen firsthand how fortunes like Vance's made enemies, and in a galaxy where grudges festered in the cold vacuum of space, kidnappings weren't just a possibility, they were a certainty. The lights flickered. Jack's instincts screamed. For a split second, everything went dark. A moment later, emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the yacht in an eerie blue glow. The music had stopped. Conversations turned into murmurs. Then, a piercing shriek broke the silence. Jonathan Vance was gone. Jack pushed through the stunned guests, scanning the area. No sign of a struggle. No broken glass. The security team, though heavily armed, looked just as lost as the guests. Someone had bypassed every defense system on the ship, snatched the galaxy's richest man, and vanished without a trace. That kind of precision didn't come cheap. This was professional. Then Jack's comm device crackled. A voice, heavily distorted, whispered, 100 trillion credits. 24 hours. Jack clenched his jaw. Of course, it was about money. Everything with Vance was. But something felt off. The timing. The way the blackout happened so cleanly. The security systems didn't just fail, they had been overridden. He replayed the message, listening carefully. A slight background noise. Machinery? A ventilation system? A voice in the distance? His gut told him the kidnapper wasn't just some random pirate crew looking for a payday. This was personal. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on the security chief, a sweating mess of a man frantically shouting orders into his communicator. If this was an inside job, the first question was, who had access to the yacht's security systems? The second was, who had enough reason to risk taking the most famous billionaire in the galaxy? Jonathan Vance groggily opened his eyes. His head throbbed, his wrists were bound, and the luxury of his usual surroundings was painfully absent. Instead of silk sheets and gold-plated furniture, he found himself in a dimly lit chamber, the cold metal floor a rude contrast to his usual heated marble. The air smelled of grease and something burnt, an industrial scent he found deeply offensive. He squinted in the darkness. A figure emerged, clad in a mask, standing next to a large metal crate. Another, unmasked, stepped into the light. Vance's stomach dropped. "Oh, come on!" he scoffed, tilting his head. "You? Really? I thought you were dead or, at the very least, bankrupt." The man chuckled, running a hand through his graying hair. "Hello, Jonathan. Still as insufferable as ever, I see." Vance sighed. "You kidnapped me. But you didn't think to bring a single bottle of my private reserve? Honestly, it's like you don't even understand who you're dealing with." The masked figure took a menacing step forward. "You should be afraid." Vance raised an eyebrow. "Of what? The terrible hospitality?" His captor shook his head. 100 trillion credits, Jonathan. You're going to pay. Vance smirked. That's a bold number. Bit cliché, don't you think? You could have at least gone with something unique, like 99.9 trillion. Adds a bit of suspense. The unmasked man's expression darkened. I didn't come for jokes. Well, clearly, Vance said dryly. Or you'd have kidnapped someone with a better sense of humor. The masked figure moved closer, grabbing Vance's collar. You think you're untouchable? I think I'm uncomfortable. Vance shot back, wrinkling his nose. What is that? Leather? Cheap. A sharp punch to his gut shut him up. He doubled over, coughing. The unmasked man leaned in. The clock is ticking, Vance. If your people don't pay, you'll wish we'd just killed you. Vance groaned, shifting against his restraints. That's cute, he muttered, his mind already working. You really think Jack Steele is just going to let this slide? His captor's smirk faltered, just for a second. Vance grinned. Ah. There it is. Fear. And despite the pain in his ribs, despite the ropes cutting into his wrists, despite the very real possibility that he wouldn't be leaving this place alive, Jonathan Vance started to laugh. Jack Steele stood in the center of the yacht's control room, a grim look on his face. The glow from the dozens of hollow screens cast eerie shadows across his chiseled features. The security footage played on loop, a few flickering frames of the blackout, a brief glimpse of Jonathan Vance mid-toast, and then nothing. It was as if the galaxy's richest man had simply vanished into thin air. Jack's fingers tightened around the edge of the console. He knew this wasn't some amateur heist. Whoever had taken Vance had been methodical, precise, like someone who knew exactly how the yacht's security systems worked. Pull up the system logs. He barked to the nervous technician beside him. The young man's fingers stumbled over the keyboard, his eyes darting to Jack, then back to the screen. Lines of code streamed by, revealing a suspicious gap in the system's timeline. Right here, Jack pointed. The blackout wasn't an accident. Someone inserted a virus, a sophisticated one. They timed it perfectly. The technician swallowed hard. What do we do now? Jack's eyes narrowed. We find them. His comm device buzzed, a message. He clicked it open, reading the distorted text with growing irritation. A ransom demand for 100 trillion credits. Attached was a small audio clip. Jack hit play, straining to catch the ambient sounds in the background. Faint mechanical whirring, maybe a ventilation system, and a distant voice, muffled, but familiar. Jack's instincts screamed a warning. This wasn't just a random kidnapping. There was a personal angle here, and he was going to find it. He turned abruptly, his mind racing. Whoever did this knows the yacht inside out. Start with the crew. Someone's been compromised. Jack didn't have time for bureaucracy. His experience had taught him one thing: the longer the delay, the colder the trail. A short interrogation with the crew led Jack to a junior engineer, a nervous young man named Davis. When pressed, Davis buckled quickly, revealing that he'd overheard a conversation about Sector 14 in the ship's mess hall the day before the party. Jack's brow furrowed. Sector 14 wasn't exactly a tourist destination. It was a notorious black market hub, where laws were more of a suggestion and life was cheap. If Vance had been taken there, it meant this was no ordinary kidnapping. It was a deliberate attack against the most powerful man in the galaxy. The underbelly of Sector 14 was as gritty and chaotic as Jack remembered. A sprawling maze of neon-lit alleys and shadowy dens, the place reeked of danger and desperation. Illegal tech traders hawked their wares, mercenaries loitered in doorways, and the air buzzed with the hum of repurposed power generators. Jack moved swiftly, blending into the crowd, his eyes sharp for any sign of trouble. He found Frankie Sparks in a dimly lit dive bar, hunched over a tablet, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Frankie was a hacker, a good one, and more importantly, he owed Jack a favor. Years ago, Jack had saved him from being spaced by an angry crime lord, and Frankie had promised his loyalty ever since. Jack Steele, Frankie drawled, barely looking up from his screen. Didn't think I'd see your ugly mug around here again. Jack slid into the seat across from him, glancing around the room. Need your help, Frankie. It's urgent. Frankie sighed, tapping away at his tablet. Always is with you. What's it this time? Lost another billionaire? Jack's expression darkened. Kidnapped. Jonathan Vance. I need a lead, and I need it fast. Frankie raised an eyebrow. Vance? The guy with the platinum socks? Who in their right mind would want him? Someone with a grudge, Jack replied, his voice tense. The ransom demand was unusually high. Feels personal. I need to know who's been poking around in his system. Frankie's fingers flew across his tablet, lines of code reflecting in his eyes. After a few tense moments, he nodded slowly. Looks like there's chatter about a hidden base on Ragnar 6. Been a lot of unusual traffic heading out that way. Could be a coincidence, but I doubt it. Jack's gut told him Frankie was right. He stood up, slipping a small stack of credits onto the table. You never saw me. Frankie grinned. Don't worry, Jack. I see a lot of things I'm not supposed to. Jack didn't waste time. Within hours, he was on his way to Ragnar 6, a desolate moon known for its harsh terrain and lack of hospitality. As his ship descended through the thick, dusty atmosphere, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. But he didn't have a choice. Time was running out, and if anyone could find Vance, it was him. Under the cover of darkness, Jack approached the coordinates Frankie had given him. The base was larger than he'd expected, a sprawling complex built into the side of a jagged cliff. He scanned the perimeter, noting the high-tech security systems and armed guards patrolling the area. Whoever was behind this had serious resources. Moving with practiced stealth, Jack crept closer, slipping through the shadows. He reached the outer wall, preparing to disable the security grid. But before he could act, a sharp prick at the back of his neck sent a jolt of pain shooting down his spine. His vision blurred, and he staggered, trying to stay upright. A tranquilizer dart. The last thing he heard before everything went black was a low chuckle, a voice he recognized all too well. When Jack came to, he was bound to a chair in a dimly lit room. A single light flickered above him, casting long shadows across the grimy floor. Standing in front of him, smirking with a smug sense of satisfaction, was Lucas Kane. Jack's eyes narrowed. Lucas was a former associate of Vance's, a brilliant engineer with a grudge and a chip on his shoulder. Well, Lucas drawled, pacing back and forth. Look who finally decided to join the party. Jack scowled. Kane. Didn't think you'd have the guts to pull something like this. Lucas's smirk widened. Oh, it's not about guts, Steele. It's about justice. Vance stole everything from me. My ideas, my career. Now I'm going to take everything from him. Starting with his precious bodyguard. Jack's mind raced. He had to get out of here, and fast. Jack Steele's muscles tensed against the restraints, but whoever had tied him up knew what they were doing. He was in a reinforced chair, wrists secured behind him, ankles strapped tight. His mind ran through the possibilities. He'd been in worse situations before, but this time, the stakes were higher. Lucas Kane, standing before him with that smug look, had always been dangerous, brilliant, vengeful, and just unhinged enough to go through with whatever plan he'd cooked up. You look like hell, Steele, Lucas said, crouching to meet Jack's glare. But then again, you always did underestimate me. Jack grunted, shifting against the restraints. Didn't underestimate you, Kane. Just didn't think you were dumb enough to pull something this big. Lucas chuckled, rising to his feet. You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about money. Vance built his empire off the backs of people like me, brilliant minds discarded the moment they were inconvenient. I designed half the tech that keeps his luxury fleet running, and when I asked for recognition? A raise? He laughed in my face. Jack rolled his eyes. So what? You figured instead of a lawsuit you'd go for kidnapping? Seems a little dramatic. Lucas's expression darkened. Vance didn't just fire me. He blacklisted me. No one in the galaxy would hire me after he spread his lies. He turned me into nothing. Jack sighed. And now you're what? Some crime boss? Holding him for ransom? Lucas grinned. Oh, Steele, you really think I want his money? No. I want him to feel what I felt. Powerless. Forgotten. He's going to beg, steal. And when he does, I'll let him know that no amount of money can save him. Jack kept his face unreadable, but inside, he knew one thing for sure: Lucas Kane wasn't just angry. He was broken. And that made him unpredictable. Across the room, Vance was slumped in his own chair, looking comically unimpressed by his predicament. Jack could tell he was annoyed, but not afraid. That was the thing about Jonathan Vance. He never truly believed anything bad could happen to him. His entire life had been a series of lucky escapes, last-minute deals, and golden parachutes. Vance yawned. So, what's the plan, Kane? You going to monologue for another 20 minutes? Because honestly, I'd rather be anywhere else. Lucas's eye twitched. You think this is funny? I think it's tedious, Vance replied, shifting in his chair. I mean, if I had a credit for every disgruntled ex-employee, oh wait, I do. Jack suppressed a groan. Vance's inability to shut up was about to get them both killed. Lucas exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure. You're going to transfer every asset you have to me. Every account, every off-world vault, every hidden stash. Vance smirked. Right. Sure. Just give me a keyboard and a few hours. Lucas leaned in. You don't understand, Vance. This isn't optional. Oh, I understand perfectly, Vance said, flashing his most insufferable grin. You're desperate, which means you're already out of options. Lucas's patience snapped. He grabbed Vance by the collar, yanking him forward. You think you're untouchable? That no one can make you suffer? Jack saw his opening. While Lucas was distracted, he flexed his wrists, testing the tightness of his bindings. They gave just a fraction, enough. Vance, meanwhile, was still running his mouth. I think you wasted your life holding on to a grudge when you could have just started your own company. Plenty of people hate me. You could have, see, now you're gripping my shirt too tight, and it's imported fabric. You're wrinkling it. Lucas shoved him back with a growl. I should kill you. Jack had heard enough. In one swift motion, he dislocated his right thumb, slipping his wrist out of the restraints. The pain was sharp, but he'd had worse. He let Lucas step away before launching himself forward, still partially bound but moving fast. He rammed into Lucas, knocking him sideways. The two crashed into the control panel, sending sparks flying. Lucas scrambled back, reaching for a weapon, but Jack was faster. He kicked out, sending Lucas's gun skidding across the floor. The guards reacted, but Vance, against all odds, did something useful for once. He swung his chair sideways, tripping one of them. The other turned his gun toward Jack, but Jack had already lunged, twisting the weapon from his grasp and delivering a hard punch to his jaw. Vance, still tied to his chair, looked down at the unconscious guard. Huh! Didn't think that would work. Jack ignored him, turning back to Lucas, who was trying to crawl away. He grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against the console. We're leaving, Jack growled. And you? You're done. Lucas coughed, a bitter smile forming on his lips. You really think this is over? Jack tightened his grip. I think I don't care. He turned to Vance. Can you walk? Vance, still tied to the chair, considered this. Well, technically, no. Jack sighed, slicing through the restraints with the captured guard's knife. Then move. The alarms had been tripped. More guards were coming. Jack knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, to get out. He wasn't leaving without Vance, but dragging a billionaire through a high-security compound wasn't his idea of fun. Vance dusted off his wrinkled suit. So, what's the plan? Jack exhaled. We run. And just as the next wave of guards burst in, that's exactly what they did. Jack Steele sprinted through the narrow corridors of the facility, Jonathan Vance stumbling behind him. The alarms were deafening now, red lights flashing wildly along the walls as automated defenses whirred to life. Jack had hoped they could slip out quietly, but subtlety had never been part of his job description. Behind them, Lucas Kane's men were already regrouping. Footsteps thundered through the halls, shouts echoing from every direction. Jack could hear the telltale hum of energy weapons charging up. "Move faster," Jack growled, shoving Vance forward. "I'm a billionaire, Steele, not an athlete," Vance panted, struggling to keep pace. Jack bit back a curse. The exit was ahead, a reinforced security door leading to the hangar bay. He needed to get them through before the guards caught up. Reaching the door panel, Jack ripped off a side panel and jammed a small hacking device into the system. The screen flickered, scrolling through layers of encryption. Come on, Jack muttered. Vance, ever unhelpful, peered over his shoulder. "That's a really slow hacking tool." Jack shot him a glare. "Maybe if you hadn't cheaped out on my contract, I could afford a better one." The guards turned the corner just as the door hissed open. Jack grabbed Vance by the collar and shoved him through, rolling behind a stack of crates as energy blasts sizzled past them. Jack fired back, hitting one of the guards square in the chest. The others ducked for cover, buying him just enough time to scan the hangar. Their escape options weren't promising. Most of the ships here were locked down, or too large to fly solo. The only viable option was a sleek, single-engine shuttle near the exit, a prototype model, judging by the high-end design. Vance groaned. "That's a company prototype. It's worth more than some planets." Jack dragged him toward it. "Then I hope it flies." The ship's hatch was locked with a biometric scanner. Vance smirked. "Well, this is convenient." Jack aimed his stolen blaster at the lock. "I'll make it work." Vance yelped as Jack fired. Sparks flew, and the scanner's screen shattered. Jack manually pried the hatch open and shoved Vance inside. "Strap in," Jack barked. Vance hesitated. "Shouldn't I?" "Strap in, or I throw you out mid-flight." Vance grumbled but obeyed. Jack bolted into the cockpit, scanning the unfamiliar controls. His time with ships was mostly limited to shooting them, but the interface was intuitive enough. He flipped a few switches, and the engines roared to life. "All right, let's see what this thing can do," Jack muttered. Behind them, Lucas Kane stormed into the hangar. He wasn't alone. Jack barely had time to process what was happening before Lucas stepped into a massive exosuit. It was military-grade, armored plating, enhanced strength, and a shoulder-mounted energy cannon. Vance's jaw dropped. "That seems excessive." Lucas activated the suit with a mechanical whir, his voice echoing through the suit's speakers. "You really thought I wouldn't plan for this, Steele?" Jack tightened his grip on the controls. "Buckle up." Lucas raised the energy cannon. The moment stretched out. Jack's instincts kicked in. He punched the throttle. The ship lurched forward, engines screaming as it shot toward the hangar exit. Lucas fired. A blast of blue energy streaked past them, narrowly missing the left wing. The explosion rocked the ship, alarms blaring. Jack gritted his teeth. "Not great." Vance was clutching his seat. "Not great? Steele, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lunatic in a battle suit just tried to vaporize us." Jack didn't respond. He was focused on the fast-approaching hangar doors. They were sealed shut, a reinforced barrier designed to withstand an airstrike. Vance pointed. "A problem." Jack already knew. The ship was moving too fast to stop, and Lucas Kane wasn't giving them time to slow down. Vance started frantically pressing buttons. "We need to open the doors. Or we're going to." Jack cut him off. "Can your fancy watch connect to this ship?" Vance blinked. "What?" "Your watch. It's got corporate access, doesn't it?" Vance hesitated. "Yes, but it's locked." Jack grabbed his wrist, slamming it against the control panel. Vance yelped. "Not gentle!" The interface scanned the watch, recognizing the executive access. The hangar doors began to open, painfully slow. Jack adjusted the trajectory. The ship barreled forward, the gap barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Behind them, Lucas fired again. The blast struck the hangar ceiling, sending debris crashing down. Jack twisted the controls. The ship rolled, narrowly dodging a collapsing beam. For a split second, they were flying straight toward solid metal. Then they were through. The ship burst into open space, the gravitational shift pulling at their bodies. Jack quickly leveled out, breathing heavily. Vance slumped in his seat. That was horrible. Jack didn't disagree, but there was no time to celebrate. Lucas Kane wasn't dead. And if Jack knew anything about men like him, this was far from over. Jonathan Vance sipped a glass of champagne, sitting in his usual oversized leather chair aboard the Golden Goose. He had showered, changed into a fresh suit, and reclaimed his platinum wristwatch, which he had spent the last 15 minutes polishing. If one didn't know better, they might think he had just wrapped up a particularly tedious business meeting rather than survived a high-stakes kidnapping. Jack Steele, on the other hand, looked like he had been thrown through an asteroid field. His knuckles were bruised, his shirt was torn, and he hadn't even bothered to sit down since they'd returned. Instead, he stood near the main control panel, arms crossed, watching as Vance enjoyed his ridiculous post-mission drink. So, Jack said finally, you gonna do something about security? Because let's be clear, your people suck at their jobs. Vance swirled his drink. Harsh. Accurate. Vance sighed dramatically and tapped his communicator. Fire everyone. A muffled voice on the other end hesitated. Sir, everyone? Yes. Everyone. Jack arched an eyebrow. That's a little extreme. Vance shrugged. They let me get kidnapped. I don't reward incompetence. Jack rolled his eyes. How about rewarding competence then? Maybe with, I don't know, a raise? Vance took a leisurely sip before responding. No. Jack's patience was wearing thin. Vance. Jack. Jack clenched his fists. I just saved your life. Vance set his glass down. And for that I'm giving you a verbal commendation. Jack pinched the bridge of his nose. You are the worst. Vance smiled. So I've been told. Jack sighed, shaking his head. He knew he wasn't getting a raise, but he had saved the richest man in the galaxy, which meant at the very least, he had job security. Probably. Their moment of relative peace was cut short when Jack's communicator buzzed. He frowned, checking the encrypted message that had just come through. This wasn't just about money. Watch your back. Jack's instincts immediately went on high alert. The sender was anonymous, but the phrasing was clear. There was more to this than a simple ransom. Jack turned to Vance. Do you have any idea what Kane was really after? Vance gave him a blank look. 100 trillion credits. Jack shook his head. No. That was just the cover. Something else was going on. Vance considered this for a moment, then dismissed it with a wave of his hand. I don't concern myself with the motivations of lunatics. Jack, however, did. He tapped a few commands on his communicator and sent the message to Frankie Sparks. If there was a hidden layer to this mess, Frankie was the guy to find it. The hacker responded almost immediately, I'll dig into it. But you're right, this isn't over. Jack exhaled slowly. He had a bad feeling about this. Lucas Kane sat in the dim light of his prison cell, staring at the floor. The restraints around his wrists were tight, the reinforced walls of the maximum security facility practically humming with anti-escape measures. The guards stationed outside didn't speak, and the silence was suffocating. Then, the lights flickered. Lucas looked up as the door to his cell hissed open. A figure stepped inside. Dressed in sleek black, with no identifiable markings, no insignia, and a presence that sent a chill down Lucas's spine. The figure's voice was calm, deliberate. You failed. Lucas clenched his jaw. I had everything under control. No, the figure corrected. You thought you did. And now you sit here, while Vance walks free? Lucas stayed silent. The figure took a step closer. Fortunately for you, we don't believe in wasting useful assets. You want another chance? Lucas hesitated. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. Absolutely.